They are called the purest Jews on earth, the last tribe to speak the Hebrew of ancient prophets, in voices unchanged by time. Their men still prostrate, forehead to stone, praying as their ancestors did when the first temple stood in Jerusalem. Their women, cloaked in silver and psalm, chant melodies no other Jew remembers. For centuries, outsiders believed these Yemenite Jews had somehow frozen in time, carried the untouched bloodline of ancient Israel into the deep deserts of Arabia. But then, DNA told a different story. When scientists sequenced their genes, they expected Levantine markers, close kin to Jews of Europe and the Middle East. Instead, they found something strange. Beneath the surface, deep Arabian ancestry, unexpected strands of sub-Saharan African lineages, winding through maternal lines, a mosaic of migrations hidden in the blood. The Yemenite Jews were not a sealed-off fragment of Israel. They were a people shaped by forgotten journeys, and by centuries lived on the edge of empires. And yet, even as their DNA reveals a tangled past, culturally, they stand apart from every Jewish community in the world. They alone preserved a pronunciation of Hebrew that echoes the chants of the Babylonian academies. They alone kept the ancient tradition of Targum, chanting each Torah verse, first in Hebrew, then in Aramaic, just as it was done in the days of the Talmud. In their synagogues, there are no chairs. Men sit on woven mats, ready to prostrate fully during prayer. Their identity is neither Ashkenazi, nor Sephardi, nor Mizrahi. It is older, stranger, rooted in legends, but also in contradictions. How did this desert tribe survive 2,000 years of isolation, persecution, exile after exile, and still preserve a living window into the world of ancient Judaism? And deeper still, one question haunts historians and geneticists alike. How, and when, did they even arrive in this remote land? The legends say they left before the fall, that as Babylon's armies closed in on Jerusalem, one group of Jews fled. Warned by the prophet Jeremiah himself, they gathered their families, their sacred scrolls, and vanished into the south, to Yemen. For centuries, that story lived only in the whispered prayers of Yemenite Jews, a tale of defiance and of guilt. Because when Ezra later called the exiles back to rebuild the temple, those in Yemen did not return. And so, it is said he cursed them, that they would know suffering and wandering, for turning away from Zion. Most historians dismissed it folklore, nothing more, until stone began to speak. In the old cemeteries near Aden, weathered gravestones were uncovered, etched in Hebrew, dating back to the 3rd century BC. And in a remote site near Sana'a, an even stranger relic emerged, a slab of stone, inscribed with the names of priestly guards, the same divisions that once served in the Temple of Jerusalem. How did this sacred roster, this fragment of the priesthood, find its way here, to the deserts of Yemen? Was this proof that a priestly family fled here after the temple's destruction? Or had the legends held more truth than scholars dared to believe? Among Yemenite Jews, the weight of this history runs deep. They still speak of the curse of Ezra with both shame and fierce pride. Pride for having preserved their ancient ways when others were swept by change, and shame for having turned their backs on Jerusalem long ago. But the stones raise a deeper question. Were these early Jews the true founders of Yemen's Jewish community? Or was there another force, another forgotten kingdom, that would soon reshape their story entirely? The year is 380 CE. Far to the south of Judea, beyond the sands, beyond the empires, another kingdom is rising. Himyar, a land of incense and stone, of ancient gods and desert kings. And then a shock. Almost overnight, its gods are gone. In their place, the single name appears. Ramanan, the merciful, the God of Israel, carved into stone, inscribed on royal seals. Mihrab shrines, new spaces of worship, rise where pagan temples once stood. Coins are minted, stamped not with idols, but with Hebrew letters, with the words, "Help the people of Israel." This was no small sect, no fringe conversion. The Himyarite Kingdom, rulers of Arabia's greatest trade routes, had adopted Judaism as the state religion. But why? Some say the king fell ill and was healed by Jewish sages from Yathrib. Others whisper of politics, an act of defiance against the encroaching Christian empires to the north, and the Christian kingdom of Aksum across the sea. To stand alone, between two rising powers, Himyar needed a new identity, one neither Roman nor Ethiopian. Judaism, ancient, proud, and already woven into Arabia's trade cities, offered just that. But this was not the Judaism of rabbis and synagogues. It was something older, stranger, a faith shaped not by exile, but by royalty, by desert kings carving their own path through sacred tradition. And as their inscriptions deepened into stone, a new kind of Judaism began to take root. But the Himyarite Judaism was not the Judaism we know. This was not the Judaism of exile, not the Judaism of Babylon or Jerusalem. In Himyar, it became something else, a faith sculpted by kings, not by rabbis. Across the stone valleys of ancient Yemen, a strange pattern emerged. Shrines called mihrab, not synagogues, rose in the cities. Places of blessing, not places of learning. And carve into stone a list, the names of priestly families, the Mishmarot, who once served in the Temple of Jerusalem. But here, in Himyar, no temple stood, no rabbinic authority, no Talmudic scrolls. This Judaism fixated not on resurrection, not on messianic prophecy, but on the memory of the priesthood, on the rituals of the temple, preserved in a distant land, a frozen echo of First Temple rites, sustained by royal decree. And the inscriptions reveal another riddle, not the menorah, not the symbols we know. Instead, words of power, Amen, Shalom, invocations in ancient scripts, a faith both familiar and foreign. For centuries, scholars assumed Judaism followed a single arc, from Temple to Talmud, from Babylon to Spain and Ashkenaz. But here was proof, another branch had grown, separate, untouched by the rabbinic world. And the deeper question remained, when Himyar fell, and its kings were gone, did the echoes of this priestly Judaism vanish with them? Or did a remnant survive, hidden within the Yemenite Jews of today? In their prostrations, in their chants, in the ancient rhythms no other Jews preserved. But before answers could emerge, one man would define this era, through blood and fire. His name was Yusuf Azar Yathayar, but history remembers him by another name, Dhu Nuwas, the last Jewish king of Himyar, a man crowned with braided curls, his payah, a warrior who wore his faith as armor. By the early 500s, the winds had shifted. Christianity was rising, across Byzantium, across the Red Sea in Ethiopia. Nadran, a wealthy Christian city within Himyar's borders, became a flashpoint. To Dhu Nuwas, it was more than a city. It was a threat, an outpost of foreign power on his soil. So he rode. His army swept through Nadran, and the king delivered an ultimatum: convert to Judaism or burn. The chronicles of his enemies call it a massacre. Thousands dead. Inscriptions carved by Dhu Nuwas himself boast of victory, of vengeance for the people of Israel. But with that bloodshed came consequence. Across the sea, the Christian king of Aksum was watching, and soon Ethiopian warships crossed the strait. An invasion, not just of soldiers, but of a holy war. The final stand of Jewish Himyar had begun. Legends say Dhu Nuwas fought to the end, that when defeat was certain, he rode his horse into the sea, vanishing beneath the waves. To his enemies, he was a tyrant. To Yemenite Jewish memory, he became something more, a martyr, a would-be Messiah who stood alone against the empires of Christendom. His name is still whispered, even today, in the songs of the exiled. But with his fall, Jewish power was shattered. But Jewish life in Yemen had only begun to transform. For generations, it was believed that the Yemenite Jews were the untouched children of ancient Israel, a fragment of the First Temple diaspora preserved in the highlands of Arabia. But then came the tests. DNA, the code written deep within blood and bone. And what it revealed shocked even the scientists. When plotted against global Jewish populations, Yemenite Jews did not cluster with Ashkenazim, nor with Sephardim, not even with other Mizrahi Jews of the Middle East. Instead, their closest genetic neighbors were Yemenis, Bedouins, the tribes of Arabia. How could this be? Were they not the descendants of Israelite priests? Maternal DNA offered another twist. Buried within the mitochondrial lineages, Those passed from mother to child lay unmistakable African signatures. Deep sub-Saharan haplogroups, rare among Jewish populations. Women whose ancestry traced back, not to Jerusalem, but to Africa. And yet, when scientists examined the Y chromosomes, the paternal lines, something else emerged. Here, the signal of ancient Israel still pulsed strong. Y DNA markers shared with Jewish priests, with Samaritans, with the Levant, fathers of Israel, mothers from across the desert and beyond. It was no longer a simple story. Were these Israelites who had intermarried with local and African women across centuries of exile? Or had an ancient Arabian tribe, perhaps under Himyarite kings, embraced Jewish identity, blending belief and blood into something new? The desert had shaped them. Isolation had preserved them. But their culture, their rites, their ancient Hebrew, held mysteries that even DNA could not explain. Because beneath the genetics was a voice, a sound, a memory, that no test could measure. Their sounds, older than memory. Words spoken as they once echoed through the courts of ancient Jerusalem. And in the highlands of Yemen, those words never faded. For while the world of Judaism moved on, new dialects, new melodies, here, in small mud-brick synagogues, another voice remained. Yemenite Hebrew. Scholars would later realize it is the closest surviving echo of how Hebrew was once spoken, older even than the Tiberian Hebrew preserved in medieval manuscripts. Listen, a Yemenite elder chants from the Torah, each consonant sharp, each guttural sound resonant, the ayin pronounced from the depths of the throat, the QOF struck hard, like a drumbeat from the ancient past. And in the pauses between verses, the boy steps forward. He chants the same line again, this time in Aramaic. The Targum, an ancient tradition lost in almost every Jewish community, but here kept alive, verse by verse, word by word. Not only the scholars knew this tongue, even children, barely taught to write, could chant entire portions of Torah from memory. Flawless, timeless, and beyond the synagogue, another language danced through the streets. A Judeo-Arabic, unique to this land, infused with Hebrew, layered with Aramaic, and sung in Yemeni cadence. In the kitchens, the markets, the weddings, Jewish identity woven into every word. A language as much a song as a tongue. But for all its beauty, life in Yemen was never easy. And while their voices sang of ancient glories, in the shadows, they faced relentless oppression. It is one of history's cruelest contradictions. A people who preserved the oldest echoes of ancient Israel forced, for centuries, to live as outcasts in the land they called home. Under Zaydi Muslim rule, life for Yemen's Jews narrowed to the margins. They could not ride horses. They could not build homes taller than a Muslim's. They could not wear bright colors, or walk with their heads held high. If they passed a Muslim in the street, they stepped aside. Barefoot, humiliation codified into law. But worse was what came for their children. The orphan's decree. If a Jewish father died, the child was taken, by force, raised as a Muslim, cut off from family, from faith. Some families married their children off at impossibly young ages, desperate to protect them. Others hid them, deep in mountain villages, or with distant kin. But not all could be saved. And when a child vanished, the community mourned as if for the dead. Yet the darkest chapter was still to come. In 1679, an edict was issued. All Jews expelled from their homes, driven into the scorched wastelands of Malza. The journey killed thousands. Heat, disease, starvation. When the survivors finally returned, months later, their homes were ruined, their synagogues desecrated. And so they became artisans of necessity. Forbidden from landowning, barred from most trades, they survived as blacksmiths, silversmiths, cobblers, in dark workshops, hammering metal beneath the gaze of rulers who saw them as lesser. Yet, even here, in the soot and the shadows, the voice remained. At night, in secret gatherings they sang songs of Jerusalem, of Zion, of a home they had never seen. And so, through this darkness, they sang songs of ancient Zion. In a world of exile, one voice rose above the silence. Shalom Shabbatzi, a man of simple means, leatherworker by trade, poet by destiny. In 17th century Yemen, as the scars of the Malza exile still bled, Shabbatzi began to write. But his words were more than poetry. They were lifelines, songs that carried a people through suffering into hope. In narrow alleys, beneath low ceilings, by flickering oil lamps, his verses were sung. Longing for Zion, for Jerusalem, glimpsed only in dreams, but also for justice, for dignity, for the simple right to exist. And beneath the mystic layers, Kabbalistic imagery, sacred names, lay raw human pain. A father mourning a child taken by the orphan's decree. A mother weaving silver, her song a shield against despair. Even today, centuries later, the melodies remain. Listen, in Yemenite gatherings, weddings, Shabbat tables, quiet moments of memory, voices rise, singing Amnin Alu. If the gates of the nobles are closed, the gates of heaven will never be shut. Shabbatsi's words, set to ancient rhythms, shaped by the desert winds, bind the community still. Across time, across exile. Because for the Yemenite Jews, to sing was to remember, and to remember was to survive. But even the deepest roots can be uprooted. And for this ancient community, one final exodus would change everything. It began with a whisper, a prophecy. They will mount up with wings like eagles. Isaiah's words. For centuries, Yemenite Jews clung to that verse, never knowing how or when it would come true. Then, 1949, the old world was collapsing. Pogroms, riots, a new state of Israel born from the ashes of war. And in Yemen danger was rising. But something else was stirring. A plan. A secret airlift, Operation Magic Carpet. Nearly 50,000 Yemenite Jews would be flown in American planes to cross desert and sea, to a land most had only known in prayer. And so they came. Fathers clutching Torah scrolls wrapped in cloth. Mothers balancing baskets, babies swaddled in scarves. Elders kissing the earth beneath the plains. Archival footage captures it still. Barefoot pilgrims, stepping onto metal wings. For many, it felt like the ancient Exodus reborn. And when the plane soared into the sky, voices rose. They will mount up with wings like eagles. Prophecy fulfilled. But arrival was not the end. In Israel, the clash was immediate. An ancient tribe of desert Jews meeting a modern, westernizing state. Their prostrations, their chants, their flowing garments, mocked, misunderstood. Discrimination followed. Children were told to modernize, to leave behind the ways of their ancestors. But pride ran deeper than shame. In kitchens and synagogues, in song and story, Yemenite Jews kept their legacy alive. And through it all, one question lingered, whispered by scholars, geneticists, and Yemenite voices alike. Yet one last mystery remains. Who were they truly? The tests still cannot agree. Are they the last living children of ancient Israel? Or descendants of an Arabian tribe, drawn to the faith of Jerusalem's God? Or both? The truth, like their chants, is layered. Paternal lines, strong, unmistakable. Deep roots in the Levant. But the maternal story, far more complex. African echoes, Arabian strands, and their autosomal DNA refuses to settle into any single box. Not fully Levantine, not fully Arabian. A blend shaped by centuries of exile, of empire, of survival. And yet, when Yemenite Jews gather to pray, when their voices rise in the ancient melodies of a vanished world, they are not a genetic category. They are memory, made living. A continuity older than kings, older than the very borders that sought to erase them. Science may chart chromosomes, but some things cannot be mapped. And as new DNA studies emerge deeper, more precise, one question still haunts every lab, every scholar. Could the next discovery finally reveal the truth of their origin? If you're fascinated by lost histories and ancient DNA mysteries, subscribe for more untold stories.